Before July 20th, 1999, Falun Gong was an ordinary part of Chinese society. On that day, the lives of 1/5 of the world's people changed forever.
In the West, we think of China as a bit of a police state and so on, but we don't really imagine what it's like when that police state uses its muscles in full force. And that's what it was like with Falun Gong.
But why did the government go after Falun Gong? Why would a single Qigong practice deserve so much attention?
They don't depend on state subsidies. They don't depend on state tolerance.
It's like the people doing things.
And in the face of torture and death, why would so many people refuse to give it up? This program attempts to answer the question, what is Falun Gong, and why is Falun Gong important for China?
Throughout my life, I felt that everywhere I found myself was just not quite right for me. I had been seeking something, but now I had finally found it. I felt I had come home.
'20th century China is defined by change. Before the communists came to power in 1949, China had already gone through revolution, civil war, and occupation by the Japanese. After the communists came to power, China went through numerous political campaigns that resulted in tens of millions of unnatural deaths. The most well-known is the so-called Great Cultural Revolution, when even people who didn't consider themselves political were butchered on the streets. Fear reigned, and the whole country was in the grip of Mao's personality cults.
The Cultural Revolution started to affect me when I was 9 years old. My father was persecuted and sent to a labor camp. So my family was separated and we couldn't stay in our home anymore. We went to my mother's school, which was very cold. I developed rheumatoid arthritis, and it's followed me through my whole life. I tried lots of different types of medicine, both Western and Chinese.
Li Wei-shun was born in northeast China's Shenyang city. A wife, mother, and former Communist Party member, she now lives with her son in New York. She found that slow-moving Qigong exercises helped relieve her arthritis pain, and that they worked better than the Chinese medicine she was taking. In 1996, she learned Falun Gong at a park in Shenyang.
My parents didn't know much about Buddhism, and I'd never learned about it because the party had always brainwashed us with atheism. After I began practicing Falun Dafa, or Falun Gong, and started living by the principles of truth, compassion, and tolerance, and doing the 5 exercises, I changed completely, just like in the Chinese saying, overturning heaven and earth.
Out of the ashes of the Cultural Revolution, a new China emerged. Business-minded reformers rose to power, and a new period began known as the economic reform and opening up to the West. Some people who were persecuted in the Cultural Revolution were reinstated. But there was almost no attempt to prosecute the crimes of the Cultural Revolution, or to heal the scars it left on the people who lived through it.
I mean, this is a country with, approximately a third of the people have gone through the Cultural Revolution. And were made to do terrible things during the Cultural Revolution. They simply can't talk about it. I mean, there's no ability to air this. It's not going to happen. The minute you start opening that kind of thing up, you're going to set off a chain reaction, a sort of terrible chain reaction. That's the fear of the Chinese leadership.
In 1989, the spirit of reform died along with thousands of protesters in the Tiananmen Square massacre. The massacre was another turning point for China. Some of the leaders of the economic reforms were ousted, and those who supported the massacre, including Li Peng and Jiang Zemin, ascended to the throne of the Communist Party. It was the same year that Li Hongzhi began teaching Falun Gong. 10 years later, Zheng and Falun Gong would cross paths. 10,000 Falun Gong practitioners would gather outside the central government compound in Beijing. Zheng would act, and the persecution would begin.
He single-handedly ordered the persecution on July 20th.
The Cultural Revolution ended with the death of Mao in 1976. Over the next 10 years, economic reforms in the CCP would open the country to foreign investment and trade. Doing business was the new revolution. As the saying went, to get rich is glorious.
I was working in exporting, so I saw who was really making money from exports. It was those children of senior officials. These were the people who really made money.
Zhou Yuyun is from the southern Chinese city of Guangzhou, now one of the wealthiest cities in China. She learned Falun Gong in 1998.
On that day, after I finished a meal at a restaurant, I went out for a walk around the south gate of the Guangzhou Zoo. That's when I saw a bunch of people practicing Falun Gong. I thought it was interesting and that their movements were very graceful, so I walked up to have a closer look. I saw a sign next to them explaining Falun Gong. After I read it, a person next to me began explaining what it was.
Falun Gong started really and spread in the parks, in practice sessions that were taking place in public view, outside. Okay, it was like the people doing things.
Qigong became popular in the 80s and 90s when China was opening up to the West. Based on traditional Chinese practices, Qigong was a relic of China's traditional spiritual culture. There was a practical side as well. China ended fully subsidized healthcare in the early 90s. There were many stories of Qigong practitioners recovering from illnesses, and many people turned to Qigong out of desperation.
Because of my poor health, I had practiced other kinds of Qigong. So it was by chance that I went to the park, and on the one side, there were people doing some dancing exercises, and on the other, there were people practicing Falun Gong.
The 5 exercises of Falun Gong, also called Falun Dafa, were relatively simple. And despite numerous claims of illnesses disappearing through the practice, Falun Gong founder Li Hongzhi emphasized the spiritual component of the practice. Being a good person by following the principles of truth, compassion, and tolerance.
My husband's mother was also very traditional, and because she was my elder, she would demand a lot of respect and obedience. She liked to eat dumplings, and I would make these for her every week. Also, her health was very bad, and I would... For instance, if her clothes were dirty, I would immediately wash them for her. Before I cultivated, I wouldn't do any of these things for her. I just wouldn't.
Some of the teachings that Falun Dafa has helped me with my family, especially my brothers and sisters, because I have a big family. There were actually 12 of us, and 10 of us are still alive.
Betty Hunter is a research librarian from New York. She learned Falun Gong after seeing people doing the exercises in Brooklyn's Prospect Park.
And when I'm dealing with them, I try to be as truthful as I possibly can based on my understanding. I try to have compassion, which means that I don't meddle in their lives anymore, even my own children. I try to have tolerance. When I think they should be doing something and they don't, I can sort of back away and allow them to do it at their own time. Or if they never do it, it's okay. And I'm especially like that with my grandchildren, and so my children always say, is that the same lady that brought us up? She doesn't look like the same lady, and she doesn't act like the same lady.
The founder of Falun Gong, Li Hongzhi, was born on May 13, 1951 in northeast China's Gongjuling city. He came of age during the Cultural Revolution, and in 1984, when Qigong was becoming popular, he decided to create Falun Gong, a Qigong practice based on the cultivation system he'd studied as a child. 5 years later, in 1989, Li began teaching Falun Gong to a few students in private. 3 years later, in 1992, Li gave his first public seminar, introducing the practice to the public. The seminar was held on Li's birthday, May 13th, at this school in the city of Changchun. Over the next 2 years, Li would travel to almost every major city in China teaching the practice. Although he lectured before crowds of thousands of people, the practice was mainly spread by word of mouth.
When I was in Thailand, I was working as a kitchen hand in a restaurant. There was a tall, good-looking kid who worked in the kitchen as well. He called me Sister Li. One day he said, "Sister Li, why are you always happy and smiling? And why is your face always glowing?" I said, "I cultivate Falun Dafa." He said, "Oh, so that's how it is." A few days later he said, "I want to learn Falun Gong. Is this okay?" I said, "Okay, sure."
In the beginning, both the Chinese government and state-run media were largely supportive. State television featured interviews with practitioners who claimed to have improved their lifestyles and health through the practice.
The changes for myself, the changes for my family and my relatives who see me. It's as though I have been born anew, as though it wasn't me anymore. The me in the past was not like this. In the past I would get drunk, smoke, fight, indulge in food and play. That's the stuff I did.
In 1994, Li stopped giving seminars in China, but he continued to write and lecture. He also traveled abroad and lectured in many other countries, eventually settling in New York in 1996, where he lives with his wife and daughter. 2 years later, Li's most popular book, Zhuan Falun, was translated into English. Since then, Falun Gong has spread to around 80 countries, and Li's writings have been translated into over 40 languages. Fueling the spread was Falun Gong's use of the internet. All the Falun Gong books in all available languages, as well as exercise instructions and music, were available for free online.
I read some Chinese philosophy, did some Chinese practices. I came across the term celestial cultivation. I decided to go on the internet and do a search on celestial cultivation. To my surprise, two things came up. And one of them was Falun Gong, and one of them was a phone number somewhere. I called that phone number and got nothing. And when I went back to the Falun Gong website, I was shocked because everything was free. I just started clicking the print button over and over and over again because I thought tomorrow the promotion's going to be over and this is going to cost money.
Practitioners use other Falun Gong websites to post works of art and music inspired by the practice. These works are also on display every May 13th when practitioners hold parades and rallies to celebrate what's become known as Falun Dafa Day. The day commemorates Li's birthday and the day the practice was first taught in public. The costumes and performances are done in traditional styles and are intended to showcase Falun Gong's connection to ancient Chinese culture. It's a connection that goes beyond the colorful silks and traditional tunes. Over 2,000 years ago in China, Confucius taught the 5 virtues of benevolence, righteousness, loyalty, propriety, and learning. Ancient Buddhist and Taoist teachings also emphasized different aspects of morality. But during the Cultural Revolution, Confucius was denounced along with Mao's personal enemies, and Mao's theories were taken as the absolute truth. Falun Gong's revival of traditional moral concepts resonated with the memories of a dead history. And in a country that had been violently cut off from its past, Falun Gong offered a way to bridge the gap.
I bought a copy of Zhuanfalun and I read it all the way home from the park, my hands just holding it up in front of me. When I read the preface, in the opening part of the book, it was a shock, something life-changing, like an earthquake. I knew this was exactly what I was looking for.
When I first started to practice Falun Dafa, we practice in a park in Brooklyn. And many times African Americans would pass by and want to know why would we be practicing something like that when it's Chinese. And we basically try to help them to understand that it's not Chinese, it's not African American, it's not Anglo-Saxon American. It's a diverse practice. And it doesn't have anything whatsoever to do with race. It has everything to do with what's going on with your own life and what you are seeking to understand at this particular time in your life.
By the spring of 1999, Falun Gong had already spread widely both inside China and around the world. But although they didn't know it, for thousands of practitioners in China, their lives were quickly coming to an end.
They took me to another room with no window. One man suddenly grabbed me and pulled me in front of him, and he started slapping my face. He said, "Do you know that I beat Zhang Hengjie to death?" Zhang Hengjie was a Falun Gong practitioner from Tieshi district. I had contact with him before his death. The other man said, "Beating Falun Gong to death is nothing and is counted as suicide." I said, "Even if you beat me to death, I will not tell you anything."
Those who stood up for Falun Gong endured vicious physical and mental torture. Those who sided with the government were often forced to persecute others.
When Jiang Zemin started this persecution, everyone in the government and everyone in the whole China, they have to say, you agree with that or you don't agree with that.
Thousands were brutally killed, driven insane, or forced out of the country. But in the end, their stories would be defined not by persecution, but by faith.
At that time, I was very sad for these people because they were so young. Some of them would call each other big sister, hoping that they can help them in society. Sometimes I think that if their parents knew that, their children would, for just $1,000, do these sorts of things. What their parents would think. When they're not torturing people, they act differently. Sometimes I would look at them and think, they're pretty innocent. But these girls around 20 years old would do those things. You can't imagine it. So at that time, during that process, I didn't feel much for myself. But to see those girls like that, I was very, very sad.
Why do Falun Gong practitioners in mainland China keep practicing and not give up under torture? I really hope a lot of them will live through it, and you'll be able to ask them yourself.